The Arctic Circle. Under the ice sits one of the biggest reserves of natural gas known to man. To get at it will take a state-of-the-art gas refinery, a giant metal monster. And this is it. Weighing in at a staggering 35,000 tons, it's an immovable giant. The trouble is, it's been built in Spain, 5,000 kilometers from the Arctic Circle. Now all they've got to do is get it there. Hammerfest, Norway, deep in the Arctic Circle. This is the world's most northerly town, unbearably cold except for a few short summer months. But this small fishing port is about to be transformed, because deep beneath the Arctic seas off the coast of Hammerfest sits one of the largest known reserves of natural gas in the world. 190 billion cubic meters of methane is buried kilometers beneath the frozen Arctic Sea, a vast untapped reservoir of energy. It's summer, and engineers are drilling over 3 kilometers into the seabed. From here, they've got to pipe the gas 160 kilometers beneath the sea to Hammerfest, and then turn it into liquid fuel. To do that, you need the largest and most advanced gas refineries ever built. But here's the problem. How do you construct a giant high-tech gas plant in the biting Arctic winter? You don't. You build it in Spain. Cadiz in southern Spain. For 2 years, 3,000 workers have been building Statoil's massive refinery here. 4,000 tons of pipes, 1,100 kilometers of electric cable, 35,000 cubic meters of fireproofing and insulation, 10,000 tons of industrial pumps, gas tanks and other equipment. This is gigantic, even for an Arctic gas rig, and it's called Snow White. July, and work on the rig is nearly finished. Now comes the biggest engineering challenge of all. Snow White has been built in the shape of a rectangle to fit perfectly onto the world's largest cargo ship. But how do you get her on board? No crane in the world is big enough to lift such a monster. Instead, Snow White must be towed out to meet the ship in the middle of Cadiz harbour. It's a risky venture, even for the experts. 4 o'clock in the morning. In 30 hours' time, the giant gas rig known as Snow White is due to leave Cadiz harbour. But now, engineers are preparing to float Snow White for the first time. Lazaro Gonzalez, the dockside supervisor, explains the operation to his men. This is the first floating gas refinery ever built. None of these men have attempted anything like this before.
La idea es quitar todo el agua de la barcaza cuando la marea está bajando y luego es la marea la que nos la sube. El tema de las bombas, ahí tenemos, para el que no haya estado metido en el tema, un gran entresijo de tuberías, bombas, mangueras hidráulicas, cables de sensores de sondas. Por favor, que todos los trabajos que tengamos que hacer pasen por Manolo, no vayamos a desmantelar algo que esté operativo.
Snow White has been built on a series of 15 massive tanks, each containing 4,500 litres of water. At the moment, they're full, and the rig is sitting safely by the dock on a sandbank. But when the water is pumped out, the tanks effectively become metal balloons, lifting the refinery out of the water. But there are inherent dangers. To fit Snow White onto a ship, she's had to be built in the shape of a huge brick. In other words, tall and top-heavy. It's vital that the water is pumped out of the ballast tanks at exactly the same rate, otherwise Snow White could capsize. This is a critical moment for the engineers on the rig, who are controlling the operation. This immense task falls upon Rocío Pérez, a highly qualified senior marine engineer. She's in charge of floating Snow White into the harbour.
Es la We're pumping the water out in a controlled way so that we can be sure that the boat is touching the ground. The pumps have been working for 30 minutes, and we're now checking that the flow of the water is as we predicted.
But within only a few minutes, things start to go wrong.
Mira, el T13 ya ha terminado.
No.
¿Cuánto le queda? 7,19 menos 6,87, 32, ¿vale? Unos 32 centímetros. Todavía va más rápido de lo previsto.
It was feared that some of the pumps would work at different rates, and it's been borne out. Every minute the rig is getting lighter in the water, and its centre of gravity is shifting. If the fault isn't fixed, 400 million euros worth of industrial kit could soon find a new home at the bottom of Cadiz harbour. With 14,000 tonnes of pipes and industrial pumps, this Arctic gas rig, named Snow White, is about to be floated in readiness for departure. Engineers are pumping water out of its 15 huge ballast tanks. But there's a problem. The pumps are working at different speeds, and Snow White's centre of gravity is shifting. There's alarm at the readings on the rig's computer system.
Había de las 10, 7, 8 marcaban más menos 1 centímetro y 2 había una diferencia de 2.
Me dijo que lo habían arreglado.
No.
Mira, en el 43 hemos empezado con diferencia.
No lo había arreglado, no me dijiste que...
Senior marine engineer Rocío Perez decides to gradually shut down the pumps one at a time to rebalance the rig.
Son estos dos, no nos interesa que baje tanto a lo mejor. Estos dos ahora los paramos,
Perez calls dockside supervisor Lazaro Gonzalez. His dock workers would have to use massive ropes to secure the rig if it got into difficulties.
Están con los tres, con todas. Y allí sale igual. Por ahí se ven un montón los caños y por eso me he dado cuenta que están las dos bombas funcionando de los tanques 31 y 41. Pero dicen, ahora la siguiente media hora no van a trabajar. Es que vamos muy rápido. Si esas bombas van muy rápido, entonces las paramos. ¿Te
crees necesario que no trabajen y que se lo punto?
Ya, no. Lo que pasa es que igual lo que hago es que acaben antes ahora. En vez de la media hora, que se acaben.
Shutting down the pumps has bought Perez some time, but she hasn't got long. It's only 6 hours before high tide, and with half-empty ballast tanks, Snow White is sitting precariously in the water. As the tide rises, the rig could lift off its sandbank, whether properly balanced or not. It's just before dawn, and the legendary Blue Marlin, one of the world's largest heavy lift vessels, arrives in Cadiz harbour right on schedule. The Marlin is a highly unusual cargo ship. She's designed to be self-sinking, enabling her to load incredible weights. And this doesn't come cheap. The Marlin costs around €250,000 a day, and the clock starts ticking the moment she drops anchor. Now that she's in Cadiz, every second counts. Its captain is Latvian Mikhail Poznaks, but as his ship comes into harbour, he hands over to a local pilot, Carlos Valier.
That's slow. 2.3. No.
Okay, half astern.
Half astern.
This operation is not for the faint-hearted. Statoil's precious gas refinery has been designed in the shape of a giant brick to fit exactly onto the Blue Marlin. This makes it tall and top-heavy. The crew of the Blue Marlin are naturally nervous because when Snow White is loaded, the rig and the ship will share the same fate. And ships that are tall with a high centre of gravity are vulnerable. This is one of the windiest stretches of coast in the Mediterranean. It enjoys plenty of sun, but it's also exposed to the full force of the Atlantic gales. It's good sport if you're a wind or kite surfer, but it's a real headache if you're an engineer trying to float a tall gas rig out into the harbour. The wind has started to pick up. It's now reached almost 50 kilometers an hour, which is over the safety limit. Snow White sits tall in the water. Once floating free, she'd be almost impossible to control in high winds.
The barge is 156 meters long. From the waterline and up, we are talking about 45 meters. So you have an extreme large sail area. So the wind is really the factor here, which you have to have control over.
The wind is still hazardous, but Snow White's ballast tanks are half empty and the tide is fast approaching. To make matters worse, there's no sign of the pilot tugs which must steer the rig if she starts to float. Perez calls the harbour master.
Hola Ángel, mira que estamos aquí, está aumentando bastante el viento. Entonces era para ver cómo lo veía, si es posible o no la maniobra, porque ya estamos, la barcaza ya tiene que flotar, no podemos mantenerla varada. Sí, llaman a prácticos, pero es que no estaba ni Carlos ni Luis. Dile de todos modos, coméntaselo, que es muy urgente, porque es para saber qué hacemos.
Meanwhile, out in the harbour, the Blue Marlin is gradually manoeuvred into position by Chief Pilot Carlos Valier, supervised by Captain Posnax.
1.5 knot speed.
This extraordinary vessel has a revolutionary design, enabling it to carry phenomenal loads. Its hull contains over 70 ballast tanks. Using a series of huge 2.5-ton pumps, the tanks are flooded. The whole ship then sinks 9 meters below the surface, so that a load can float above the submerged deck. Once the gas plant is exactly in position, the captain will start to pump out the tanks, lifting the ship back out of the water with Snow White on top. But to make room for the sunken ship, a massive hole has been dug in the bottom of Cadiz harbour, 300 meters long, 100 meters wide, and 20 meters deep. All they've got to do is find it. Using global positioning satellite systems along with traditional charts, Captain Posnax and Chief Pilot Valle attempt to maneuver the ship over the pit. Whatever happens to the rig, the captain of the Blue Marlin has to be ready. As the nose of the ship moves directly over the trench, the Marlin's massive anchors are dropped one by one. It's vital to position the ship correctly, otherwise the Marlin could keel over when the time comes to sink it. According to the ship's sophisticated electronic systems, they're in position and ready. But the gas rig is not. As high tide approaches, the problem with the pumps is still to be sorted. Ready or not, the time has come.
No, si ya cuando quieras, ya flota. A ver, según prácticos siguen adelante, que ellos vienen ahora a las 11:15, pero que en principio ellos no ven el problema.
Rocío Perez races off to meet the tug pilots, who have arrived just in time.
When the barge is floating, it's ours. When the tugs are connected and the movement starts, it's the captain who's responsible.
Es el capitán el que se hace responsable.
With some difficulty, the pilots of the tugs and the harbour master board Snow White to receive instructions.
¿Tú vas para allá? Bueno, tú te vas a quedar allí entonces. Quedamos al canal 14. Ya se ha ido.
Ángel, vamos.
Marine surveyor Henrik Vestrin is nervous of the strong wind and is demanding an additional pilot tug for safety.
You keep the fifth one here.
Everything right now?
I don't want them here, no. I want when we start. I want all over here.
Rafael, ¿cuánto tienes tú ahí?
As the tugs get into position, engineers prepare to release Snow White from her moorings.